Lyra Ashgrove had known cold before, but not like this. The wind of the Wilderlands cut through her cloak, as if it wanted to strip her down to nothing, the way her pack once had. 3 years ago, she had stood in the center of the Blackthorn training circle, shaking, while the entire pack watched her fail the duel that was supposed to prove she belonged among them. She was an Omega, no claws that could tear through steel, no howl that could shake the trees, just a girl who flinched when she should have struck, and who bled when she should have won. The Alpha had looked at her the way a man looks at a broken tool. She is a stain on this bloodline, he had said. Take her to the border and leave her there. No one argued. No one cried. Her own parents had looked away. That night, she had walked into the Wilderlands with nothing but the clothes on her back, and everyone believed she would be dead within the week. She was not. For the first month, survival was luck alone. She ate what she could steal from careless traders, slept in hollowed-out trees, and ran more times than she could count. It was in the middle of that brutal first season that she found old Ren, a war mage who had once served a king before disgrace and exile carried him to the same forgotten edge of the world that now held her. He found her half-frozen near his camp, too stubborn to die and too frightened to ask for help. He gave her a blanket and did not ask her name. "You are still alive," he said, studying her, the way no one in her pack ever had. That means something. Ren did not train her like a warrior. He trained her like a puzzle that needed solving. He taught her that an Omega's body would never match an Alpha's raw strength, so strength was the wrong question. The right question, he said, was where a stronger opponent was slow, where they were arrogant, where they assumed victory before the fight had even begun. "They will look at you and see nothing to fear," Ren told her one evening, as she sharpened a blade by firelight. "Let them believe that until the very last second." Under his guidance, Lyra learned to move like smoke, to read the shift of muscle before an attack came, to use terrain, timing, and precision instead of force. She learned about poisons drawn from wilderland plants, how a single drop of wolfsbane extract could bring down a wolf twice her size if placed exactly right. She trained until her hands stopped shaking and her mind grew sharp enough to plan 3 steps ahead of instinct. She never forgot the humiliation of that training circle. She simply stopped needing anyone's permission to be strong. 2 years into her exile, tragedy found her again. A raiding party swept through the Wilderland outpost, where Ren had quietly built a small community of other outcasts. Lyra was away hunting when it happened. By the time she returned, Ren lay dying beneath the wreckage of his own tent, his chest torn open by claws that moved too fast and too precisely to belong to any common rogue. He lived only long enough to speak one name: Varric Nix. Lyra had heard whispers of that name before, carried on the wind by frightened travelers. Varric Nix was no ordinary rogue. He was a commander who sold his blade to the highest bidder, a shifter feared even by kings, a shadow that left entire packs in ruin and vanished before anyone could strike back. She held Ren as the light left his eyes, and in that silence, something inside her hardened into purpose. She did not scream. She did not weep where anyone could see. She simply promised, in the quiet of her own heart, that she would find Varric Nix one day, and she would be ready. For the following year, Lyra tracked rumors of Varric's movements the way a hunter tracks a scent. She stayed hidden, worked odd jobs in border towns, gathered whispers from mercenaries who did not know her name or her past. She grew patient in a way that surprised even herself. Ren had taught her that revenge chased carelessly always failed. Revenge planned patiently, however, rarely missed. Far from the Wilderlands, in the gleaming stone halls of the Ashen Crown Kingdom, Alpha King Kael Draven carried his own decade-long hunt for the very same man. 10 years earlier, Varric Nix had led the attack that destroyed Kael's family and wiped out an allied pack that had trusted the Ashen Crown for protection. Kael had been young then, barely old enough to carry the weight of a crown, and he had watched helplessly as everything he loved burned. He swore that night that he would end Varric Nix himself, no matter how long it took. A decade of hunting had cost him more than he wanted to admit. 2 of his best generals had died trying to corner Varric. Alliances had shifted. Kingdoms had grown wary of getting involved in a war against a man who seemed to disappear like mist whenever cornered. Exile had grown into a strong and respected king, feared on the battlefield and trusted by his people, but the one victory he wanted most had always slipped through his fingers. When his scouts finally reported that Varric had been spotted near an old border fortress in the Wilder Lands, gathering loyalists for what looked like a new campaign, Exile did not hesitate. He gathered his strongest warriors and rode through the night, determined that this time, the hunt would end. He arrived expecting a war. He found something else entirely. The ruins of the fortress stood silent under a pale moon, broken stone walls casting long shadows across the courtyard. Exile's warriors fanned out cautiously, weapons ready, senses straining for the ambush they were certain awaited them. Instead, they found a lone figure already locked in combat. A woman moved through Varric's guards with a kind of precision Exile had never seen from any alpha warrior. She did not meet strength with strength. She slipped beneath a swinging arm, drove her blade into the gap behind a guard's ribs, and was already moving toward the next, before the first had fallen. She used the broken terrain as a weapon, forcing her attackers to stumble over rubble while she remained perfectly balanced. Every movement was economical, deliberate, terrifyingly calm. Exile raised a hand, signaling his warriors to hold. Something told him to watch first and act later. Varric himself finally stepped forward, clearly irritated that this stranger had cut through his guards so easily. He was broad and battle-scarred, a shifter whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his skill. He looked at Lyra, the way so many had looked at her before, as though she were nothing worth his full attention. "An Omega," he said, almost laughing. "They send an Omega to kill me now?" "No one sent me," Lyra said quietly. "I came on my own." He lunged, expecting the fight to end quickly. It did not. Lyra ducked low, letting his claws pass over her head, and drove her blade upward into the underside of his arm, where the muscle was thinner and the nerves closer to the surface. He roared in pain and fury, swinging wildly, but each strike met only empty air where she had been a heartbeat before. She was smaller, yes, and weaker in raw strength, but she had spent years learning exactly where strength failed to matter. When Varric finally cornered her against a broken pillar, certain he had trapped her, Lyra looked him directly in the eyes. "You killed the only person who ever believed in me," she said. "Tonight, that debt is paid." She slipped past his final strike, spun behind him with a speed that defied his expectations, and drove her blade, coated in the same wolfsbane poison Ren had taught her to prepare, directly into his heart. Varric Nix, the man who had evaded kings and armies for a decade, collapsed to the stone ground, and did not rise again. The courtyard fell utterly silent. Exile stood frozen, staring at the scene before him. His deadliest enemy, the man who had haunted his nightmares for 10 years, lay dead, not at the hands of an army, not by his own blade, but by a lone Omega woman his own kingdom would have dismissed without a second glance. He stepped forward slowly, his warriors parting to let him pass. Lyra turned to face him, breathing hard, blood and dust streaking her clothes, but her eyes were steady. "Who are you?" Exile asked, his voice low with disbelief. "Lyra Ashgrove," she answered, "formerly of the Blackthorn Pack, exiled 3 years ago as unfit." A murmur rippled through Exile's warriors. Several of them exchanged skeptical glances, clearly struggling to reconcile the word Omega with what they had just witnessed. One of his generals stepped forward, opening his mouth, as if to challenge her claim, but Exile raised a hand to silence him. He had seen it with his own eyes. There was no room left for doubt. "You fought him alone," Exile said. "You could have died." "I have already survived worse than dying," Lyra replied simply. Exile studied her for a long moment, the moonlight catching the exhaustion in her eyes alongside something unbreakable beneath it. He thought of every report his scouts had brought him over the years, every failed attempt by seasoned warriors to bring Varric down. None of them had succeeded. This woman, cast out and left for dead by her own pack, had done what his entire kingdom could not. "My kingdom owes you a debt," he said. "Come with us. Not as a prisoner, not as a curiosity, as someone I clearly underestimated, the same as everyone else." Lyra hesitated, Trust did not come easily to someone who had been betrayed by the very people meant to protect her. But something in Cale's voice held no mockery, no pity, only a rare and genuine respect that she had not felt directed at her in a very long time. "I don't want charity," she said carefully. "I'm not offering any," Cale answered. "I'm offering a place among people who will see you for what you actually are, not what your old pack decided you must be." The journey back to the Ashen Crown took 3 days. Lyra said little along the way, still guarded, still cautious of a kindness that felt unfamiliar, but she noticed how Cale's warriors, who had first looked at her with suspicion, began to speak to her differently after witnessing her calm competence during a skirmish with wandering rogues on the second night. She noticed how Cale himself never once tried to claim credit for Varric's death, always correcting anyone who assumed otherwise. When they finally arrived at the Ashen Crown's Great Hall, its high stone arches and banners of deep blue and silver felt like something out of a story she never believed she would be part of. Cale stood before his assembled court and told them plainly what had happened at the border fortress, sparing no detail of what Lyra had accomplished alone. The hall fell into a stunned hush, followed by a murmur of disbelief that slowly, gradually, shifted into something like awe. Cale turned to her in front of everyone. "For 10 years, my kingdom searched for the strength to end a threat that haunted us all," he said. "That strength was never about rank or blood. It was about will, patience, and skill, qualities this woman carries more fully than warriors twice her size." He offered her a formal place within his court, not as anyone's mate, not as a prize to be displayed, but as a strategist and warrior whose value could no longer be denied by anyone, least of all herself. Lyra looked around the hall, at faces that held none of the contempt she had grown so used to. For the first time since that cold night 3 years ago, when her own pack had cast her into the wilderness, expecting her to die quietly and be forgotten, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not relief exactly, something steadier than that. She thought of Ren, of the quiet lessons he had given her, when no one else believed she was worth teaching. She thought of every night she had trained alone in the cold, refusing to let despair win. She thought of the label that had followed her all her life, weak, unfit, Omega, and how little it had ever actually described who she was. Standing in that great hall, no longer an exile, no longer invisible, Lyra understood that she had not needed anyone to save her. She had simply needed the world to finally catch up to what she already knew about herself. Cale watched her from where he stood, something like quiet respect settling behind his eyes. He said nothing more that night, only allowed the moment to exist as it was. The title Omega, he realized, had never truly meant what his kingdom assumed it did. It had simply been waiting for the right person to prove exactly how wrong that assumption had always been.